G'day survivors, hope you're protecting your beans. Today we are going to be talking about adding your own user inputs, keybinds, to your mods. So let me show you how to add your own custom key press inputs into your mods. To do that, it's very simple. All we need to do is have an inputs parameter in our config mods class config, and then the name of our mod. And then we need to have an inputs.xml file somewhere within our mod structure and link to it here. So here I have my Zen template mod in the data folder. I have my inputs XML in the root of the data folder. If I double click that, that brings up my modded inputs. And here's where we define what the key is, what category it belongs to in the settings menu to keep everything organized, and what the default keybind is and the title of it. So input name, that's going to be the same for all three of these config parameters. LOC is your localization strings. So this would ideally come from your string table and have translations for all the different languages that you want to support with your mod. You can of course put English or any other language that you are developing for in your native country. You can just have this hard coded, but obviously if you plan to publish your mods on the workshop for everyone to use, that might hinder its popularity because only people who speak your language will know what's happening. That obviously also applies to your item descriptions and everything. So string tabling is a great habit to get into if you're publishing publicly. Sorting name is in the in-game menu in the options tab. So I'll just boot up my game here and show you what I mean. This is the sorting name, and again the localization. So I just call all of mine Zen to keep it in a simple category, but you could have this as your mod name, for example. So your mod name, and then you could have your mod name translated into different languages and have that as your localization string. Just keep in mind that all the mods you create that have the same sorting name will group all of those inputs under that sorting name. So you might want to make this your modder name rather than have several different individual mod categories for your inputs. So now if I open up my settings menu and I go to controls and we go configure keybinds, you can see up here we have string your mod name, which I haven't translated and localized. If I click on that, here is our key input. We can rebind it here, and then obviously in game we can reference the action keybind name instead of the key itself, so that the user of our mod can rebind it to whatever they want. And here is where you define the keybind. For me personally, when I'm creating a new mod, all of the letters are just K, lowercase k, and then the letter. But if you want to use things like numpad and stuff like that, what you can do is rebind this key and then open up your documents folder, go to Daisy, and then go to your user presets. And in here, you can search for your keybind and see what the keybind becomes when you assign it to the key you want it to be. And then you can copy this into your default button name to make that the default key. Now, when it comes to detecting if the keybind is pressed, it all depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to make an action based on a keybind, then that's completely different to opening a GUI or some sort of in-game screen. First of all, let me show you how to just detect the key being pressed in-game. So you can see down the bottom left there, I'm tapping the N key and it's popping up key pressed. This is being detected on the client. So if I bring up my mod here, and we come to my mission gameplay code. What I'm doing here is in the onUpdate loop, I have extracted this into its own function. You don't have to do that. You could have this directly in the onUpdate function. I like to move my code outside of the vanilla functions to make it easier for modders to adjust my code if they need to and things like that, keep my code organized. So here under update example, the first thing I'm doing is getting the player base if we need to reference that later. If there's no client player loaded, then nothing happens. Otherwise, we check if the input by name is currently pressed, local press. And then here I could open a GUI instead of just printing to the chat if I needed to. And I'll show you examples of that when we get to the user interface part of the series I'm working on, because everything's its own bag of worms. I want to keep everything in its own section. For now, we'll just focus on how to detect the key press. If we bring up the inputs, that's this thing here, this name. So if I copy that over here, that's what this is checking for. And Zen underscore check input is simply checking. I'm not sure what this stands for. I think it's maybe get user action API or something like that. If the input is currently valid, if this doesn't return null, then we get the input by name and we check if that input has been pressed on the local computer. You can check server side if a key is pressed when it comes to actions, and I'll show you an example of that. Now, if I wanted to use a key press as an action trigger, so when you're in game you can hold F by default to drink from wells and perform continuous actions. If I wanted to have a custom key for some action I've created, things are a lot more complicated. Now I need to define a custom action input like this. So we have this is an example from my music mod, and this action is used to start and stop music while you're in a vehicle, in a car. So you put a music cassette in the cassette slot and you press K by default. And so what we do is we inherit from default action input, and then we set the input to our user key. So that would be whatever is in our inputs.xml name. So this action here goes in there. And then you can copy the rest of this code, and then in update possible actions, things will be a little bit different if you're not in a vehicle. This code here is checking if the player is in a vehicle. So all of this code is basically copied from vanilla scripting code. So for example, if I go over to, let's look for turning on the headlights of a car. Actually, let's go for car horn because that's the first thing that popped up here. So action car horn base uses car horn short action input as its input type. So if I search for that now and bring that over. Okay, so this action inherits from continuous default action input. It sets the input to UA car horn. So if you wanted to do a continuous action in a vehicle with your custom keybind, what you would do is copy all of this code into a new file. You would change this to your action input, and then just go through the code and make sure nothing here would block what your action should do, basically. And this looks fine to me. So this should pretty much run straight out of the box. If you just rename this to your car continuous action input, and then in your action class, all you would need to do is define a continuous action in this case, or in my case, it's an interact single tap action. And then we just need to override the get input type to our action input. So those are the steps for adding a custom keybind into your DayZ mods. I hope that helps. Again, if this is all brand new to you, go to my GitHub, check out my Zen music mod, and you can copy my code from there and adapt it to your purposes.